Hi, I'm Susan Wise Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna, Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings.
And in our last episode, we started talking to Holly Ramsey and Michele Evard about college admissions and college applications. And we had this great scheme, which was we were going to do 4 don'ts and 4 do's. And it was going to be this nice one episode. And we spent so much time on the first section that we decided to split this into 2. So if you haven't heard the first part of our interview with Holly and Michele, go back and listen to that now, because then you'll know all about them. You'll know about their fabulous book, which is called College Unmazed, Your Guide to Design and Document Your Homeschool, and you'll be able to hear their bios. But rather than going and repeating all of that, I'm going to encourage you to go listen to it, and we're going to go on to the second part of our conversation, which is all of the things you can do. And I think where we want to start is as sort of it's the flip side of our last don't point in the last episode, which was don't push your kids into all upper level courses to increase their odds of getting into one particular school. And we talked about the problems with this and why that doesn't actually benefit your child. But let's flip this around as we start talking about our first do, which is do document your homeschool journey. And I think the theme around which we're going to organize documenting your homeschool journey is that you want to help your students stand out by showing a college admissions officer who they really are, not just how many AP classes they've taken, not what their great scores are, but what their unique strengths and interests are. And Holly, I think you had a particularly interesting interaction with Georgia Tech admissions about this.
Yeah, so I would just really recommend, I don't care if your listeners, students have any interest in Georgia Tech whatsoever. They have a fabulous admissions blog that is worth following for every parent, because they just routinely drop gems that are applicable across the entire landscape. So just last week, they sent out an email, and their test, they said, they called it the high school hallway test.
Oh, I love that.
Assumed your application was in paper, which, never happens anymore, hardly ever. If you dropped that in a crowded high school hallway and it did not have your name on it, would someone be able to pick it up, read it, and hand it back to you because it could only be your application? And the writer goes on, it was Katie Matley, who works for Georgia Tech. She goes on to say that an application is almost akin to a fingerprint, because that's how specific it should be. And she says that a student who is excited about how they spent their time in high school and genuinely wants to engage in college life and to amplify those joys will create a strong college application. And so, anytime I hear joy associated with the college application process, I just want to cheer. Because this should be, when it is done well, this is an intentional journey that a student takes, that they grow in their own self-knowledge, they refine their concept of what they are looking for, and they match with an institution that also values what they value. To me, that's so much better than twisting yourself into a pretzel to try to fit what some college you think you want to go to wants.
So instead of stacking them up with AP classes just because the letters AP are on it, we want to talk about how you're going to document your homeschool journey in a way that will really help you create that fingerprint of an application. And so this is our first big do. I'll say it again because I was not always great about this. Do document your homeschool journey. And Michele, I know you have some thoughts on this. I want to give you my personal take, which is I had 4 kids. And from experience, I won't give you too many specifics. From experience, I can tell you that going back and reconstructing what you did in any particular year, 2 years later, even 2 years later, is almost impossible. Amazing how quickly that information flees your mind. So What is a better plan, Michele?
Do as I say, not as I did all the time. Because I do. Yeah. I had some records on a lot of things. And then, you start talking to your kid and he says, oh, and I watch this YouTuber and I follow this scientist and I follow this engineer and I follow this. And you realize, oh my word, you just studied college level engineering. A survey, an introduction, not the actual labs, but oh my goodness, I didn't even realize. And so you're digging back into his YouTube history to see what else he's learned.
Right.
Seriously, though, there are lots of ways to keep records. When they're young, depending on the state you live in, you may need to keep some records. And often I'll tell families, use your camera, use your calendar, and use your journal, right? Jot down what was interesting about today. Have a conversation at dinner. Say, hey, what did you learn today? All of us have learned something every day. And bringing that into the conversation and then jotting notes. As kids get older, encouraging them to keep notes is a wonderful thing for them to do personally, but don't rely on that for your part, right?
Nope.
It's this parent's responsibility. You have taken the responsibility to be the home educator. Keep the records. So what would I keep? Using photos, using notes, your library records, your bookshelf, you're jotting down those things. If they take any classes, whether it's online or through their local co-op, jotting down that information sooner rather than later is really important. And if you don't have time to keep it all super organized and nice, just keep it. Keep a folder. You can look back at it later. Keep work samples. Don't just say, oh, yeah, they made this presentation and we recorded it for grandma, but now we're done. Keep it for yourself. It'll help you later on. Lists of books, lists of YouTube, or, what podcasts they listen to. And you don't have to, when you're doing it, keep it. One family I worked with used buckets, right? You don't have to have a math bucket that's discrete and separate from your science bucket and from the extracurricular bucket, right? Just keep it all. You can work on separating it into courses later if you have to.
Well, and I do feel like a lot of home educators miss the chance to document fascinating stuff that their kids have done because it doesn't seem like a quote unquote course. Right? Absolutely.
And it is hard to determine what's extracurricular versus what's going to be on the transcript. If you look at my kids we learn all the time, right? So if when you're learning, you're in education, then you can document lots and lots of things. But separating those can be a little bit after the fact.
So our takeaway here is you keep all the records and then you can sort them out when you're actually putting the application together.
Yeah, exactly. And, so often I think parents, homeschool parents in particular, can have a strong desire to want to transcript everything. How do I turn this into a credit for my student? And it's not that I would necessarily tell parents, don't turn this into a credit, but sometimes I find when parents are asking that question, they have not actually looked at a college application. They have not created a practice account for the Common App. And so that's a little pro tip for all your listeners out there. Go ahead, go create a Common App account. You can create a practice account. You can do all kinds of things on that practice account. You can create a practice account and then invite yourself as a recommender using another email so you can see the counselor side of the Common App. Do all those things. And I think when you do that, you begin to realize, oh, there are many sections on this application. And perhaps what I'm thinking has to be a class credit would actually shine much brighter as one of 10 activities that I can list rather than getting lost in a sea of academic credits. So you do have flexibility.
Let me just add something here because parents who are right at the beginning of this process may not realize what the Common App is. So the Common App is sort of a central clearinghouse. A lot of colleges subscribe to it where you can fill out one application and then it goes to a bunch of different colleges at the same time. Not every college takes the Common App, but enough of them do to where it is absolutely worthwhile creating an account and getting started on that. And even if colleges that you end up applying to don't use the Common App, a college app is a college app. It's going to be the same kind of stuff. So we'll link, it's commonapp.org. We'll link to it in the show notes. So if you're just at the beginning of this application journey, go there immediately, poke around, look at all of the different parts of it. And as Holly says, create a practice account and start messing with it.
Now, Michele and Holly, I'm hearing you say document as you go, but in the book that you released, which I encourage our listeners to check out for more detail, you talk about core 4 documents, or the core 4 that are specific things that you'll need for your college admissions profile. Could you go into these core 4 a little bit?
Absolutely. I would like to start with the transcript and taking a slight step back into when you're designing your homeschool plan. Susan, you said go and look at the Common App. Absolutely. But also look at college websites, see what's required. So every state is different. Some states have state mandated graduation requirements for public school students. Some say each individual school district determines for public school students, but that's not for homeschoolers. You, as a home educating parent, decide what the graduation requirements are. But colleges have entrance requirements. So going and looking at what is required is super helpful. Now, I'm not sending an 8th grade kid to do this, but I would recommend a parent of an 8th grader who's going to homeschool look at this to get an idea of what are they looking for. 4 credits of English, 4 credits of math, etc. And that's going to form your transcript, right? They make sure that you have those credits covered. As Holly said, not everything has to be a credit. Some things you can choose. Say a kid in school takes orchestra as a class during the school day, it's on their transcript. If they take it at the community orchestra after school, it's not on their transcript. It's an activity. Well, that's easy. If you're a homeschooled kid doing an orchestra, is that a class or you get to choose?
Yeah.
Right? So there's choice that's going to be made, but looking at the homeschool transcript and making sure you cover those required core areas and give a flavor of what additional things that the kid has done. Really, really important. What makes an official transcript an official transcript? The words official transcript. Also signing and dating, right? But making sure you have indicated that you've got that this child has met those requirements and then some on some of the things that they've done is really important.
And we actually, on the welltrainedmind.com website, we do have some college admissions information for you. And one of the things that I did with his permission was post my oldest son's high school transcript, which I did with a pencil on a piece of paper because I had a form, but I didn't actually have a printer anymore that would print out the form, and I didn't have a typewriter because those were the days. You can see exactly what a transcript is. It's not magic. It is a list of the courses that the student took, how much credit you gave, and what the grade was. And colleges do like to see that students have had a certain number of courses in the humanities, a certain number in maths and sciences. You've got to put those PE credits on there. But all of those things this is just a record keeping challenge for parents. It's good in terms of curricula planning so that you don't suddenly think, wait, we haven't done history at all. I hope nobody's in that position, but it happens sometimes. We haven't done history at all. We should do our history classes. But do go to welltrainedmind.com as well. And Susanna, maybe we can link to that sample transcript in our show notes. Yeah.
And a transcript, 1 page, please. This is an overview.
Yes.
This is an overview.
Right.
Well, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that in many colleges, the transcript, particularly for homeschooled students, is not going to be the main thing that the admissions officer looks at because they're aware that mom wrote the grades on there. But in most cases, when a college has government financial aid to disperse, they have to have a transcript to show that the student has graduated from high school. It's a federal requirement. Otherwise, they can't offer student loans or a Pell Grant or anything like that. So in many, particularly smaller schools, the transcript is mostly going to be for the financial aid office. But if you want financial aid, you darn well better have it.
Right. And, just stepping back a little bit, we do call these the 4 core documents, and we've only hit one so far, so we'll definitely go through the rest. But it's also important to realize that even with the Common App and 1,000 schools on the Common App, there is no one set admissions process really for colleges. So we view these as the 4 core documents, and if you have them, you will be equipped for every situation. However, there are some schools that don't even want to see the official transcript unless and until you decide to go there. So the student will actually fill out a self-reported academic record when they apply, the SRAR. And again, it's good for a homeschool parent to have a transcript because the SRAR better match the official transcript if and when the kid decides to go to that school. But there are some places that the counselor requirements are very, very sparse. And that is usually your places that are getting 40 to 140,000 applications every year.
Yep.
But for these ones that actually have time to read, these 4 core documents kind of cover all your bases. So if your transcript is your one pager, you're probably going to back that with some course descriptions. And
this is number 2, by the way. Number 1 was transcript.
2.
This is for people who are listening while they're running. Number 2, course descriptions.
Number 2, course descriptions. And this is really where you are going to put a little flesh on the bones. You are not going to make this a rotund person. This is still going to be a lean flesh on the bones. You do not want to deliver a 45-page course description package to colleges, but you do want to give them a sense in about a paragraph or so per course as to where did they take this thing? How did they take this thing? What was the format of this class? Was it online? Was it synchronous? Was it asynchronous? Was it in the home? Was it in a co-op? Colleges are interested in that. A brief description, brief. And I know, Susan, I did some work for your school side of things, Well-Trained Mind Academy, and actually taught some of the people who are in there how you go from a 2-page syllabus to a 1-paragraph course description. So, what are the key learning objectives? What materials did you use? And then finally, how was this thing evaluated? Like, how did you come up with the grade? Was it 50% hands-on projects and 25% discussion and maybe a final test or a couple tests? Give a sense of how the grade was arrived at. So ideally, though, you want to keep this course description package succinct. And I've heard, one admission officer told me, never do I read the whole thing and never do I not read it at all. So just know your admission readers are probably going to be dipping into course descriptions as they have questions. So the more unique the classes, the more homegrown the classes, the more intriguing the classes, it probably needs a little more description. If you're doing Algebra 1, and I think we, with the exception of Michele, maybe Michele could come up with like a really exciting Algebra 1 description. I, a history and philosophy major, think, Algebra 1 is Algebra 1. That can probably be a very brief description if it's a standard Algebra 1 class. If you're doing a dual enrolled class, you maybe just need the course title there even, and just say this was a dual enrolled class. Save your bandwidth for where it really matters, where it is unique, and parents need to realize this is an academic document. It is also a marketing document. So you need to be clear. You need to be concise. It needs to be visually easy to read, and you better have your key points up front. You are creating a soundbite about your student. So make sure it's the soundbite you want it to be.
It's an elevator pitch, right? So if you listen to investing shows, your elevator pitch is what you can tell someone about your business while you take the elevator up to the 4th floor that's going to make them want to invest. And you've just got to appreciate how incredibly pushed these admissions officers are. They have thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of pages to sort through. So you can think of it as marketing. That's useful, I think, when you're formatting it, but also just think of being kind. Okay. You're not doing this because they don't care. You're doing this because they're so overwhelmed.
Additional information available upon request. I recommend that every parent include that information. And here's why. I was talking to one admissions counselor who read Homeschoolers and said, every year there's one that I'm like, this sounds really interesting, but I don't have enough here. And we'll reach out at that school. They have the money to have that person reach out to the parent and say, I need more. Go ahead and put it. I cannot make any guarantee that any school will do that. The goal is to show that you know what you're doing, you know what your kid did, that you covered the requirements so that you don't have them come and ask you. Some will. I think that's really cool. But I also had an admissions officer when I said I help homeschooling families design and document their education. He said, not 72 pages, right? In that kind of voice.
Right.
You know, that means he had a 72-page document. Please.
Absolutely.
These people, the ones who are reading high schools, who often are grouped, they'll have a territory, so they'll have the same high school they read multiple times. So they get to know what's at that high school. 6 to 8 minutes is the amount of time they have to read one student's complete file. Yeah. The kid's essay, the kid's activities, the transcript, the counselor rec, the teacher recs, 6 to 8 minutes. It's just not a lot of time. Typically for homeschoolers, the person who's reading homeschooled applicants gets a little more time per, but let's make it easy for them. We don't want them going, I have to read this one now. Don't set your kid up for that, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about the 4 documents. There's also the kids part of the essay. The idea is these people need to come together and tell a story overall about your kid. Any one part feeds into that. So we did the transcript number 1, course descriptions number 2. Right. The homeschool profile is number 3. And some parents are like, school profile, that says it's optional, right? Like, okay, sure, it can be optional, but it's an opportunity. It's a time place where you can put the philosophy you used. What was your educational philosophy? What were your goals? Very briefly, we're talking a 2-page, no more than 2-page document. And it's not all on philosophy. Your grade scale.
Yes, that's important.
Any external providers you might have used. The kinds of things that are important to know about the context for your homeschool, what the opportunities were. If you look at a school profile, they'll say things like, we have this many AP classes or this many honors classes, this many of our students go to college, just to give a demographic overview of what's possible there. Graduation requirements, sometimes it's important to put on your school profile. If your child had accommodations, sometimes for a learning difference, sometimes that can be on the school profile. You have to think about where you put it because you're painting a whole picture through this documentation. And you're trying to remember, just like a kid answering a question, what is the question that the college application officer has when they're reading this document? And overall, what do they need to know?
It might be useful and I don't think you should copy this, but it would be useful for parents to go to, we'll provide a link. The College Board has a page for school administrators called Creating Your School Profile.
Yes.
So that you know what schools are sending along with these applications. And then, of course, you're going to adapt this. You don't have to describe how many students get a free lunch if you're doing your homeschool profile. But there are some really important things in here about your grading procedures and the availability of extracurricular opportunities and the availability. Look, if you're doing a homeschool profile, and when my kids were small, and we still live on the family farm, but when they were smaller, there was just not a lot within driving distance, right, that they could take part in. And that's the sort of thing it's really important to note. Whereas, if you're in downtown Seattle and they can walk to 17 different orchestras, that's a whole different ball of wax. So you just need to give them some sense of what was available to you and how you made use of it.
Yeah, that context and nuance is just so important for parents to explain. And I would just encourage parents to think about what you know as obvious and consider that the admission reader may not know that as obvious. So, for example, in many states, it can be next to impossible for homeschoolers to get a seat to take an AP exam. Mm-hmm. So a family may opt for dual enrollment over AP simply for that reason. Michele and I talk to admission officers every year who are shocked to learn that homeschoolers can't get AP exams. It needs to be explained. So they don't care what choice you make. They just want to understand why you made the choice. Mm-hmm. And the homeschool profile provides you one place to do that. If you're a family with multiple children, your homeschool profile is probably going to look fairly similar for each of your children. It'll evolve as your homeschool evolves, obviously. But then there's this fourth document, which is the counselor letter of recommendation. Mm-hmm. So if your homeschool profile is explaining your school choices, that counselor letter of recommendation is providing the context and the nuance about your particular child. How did they learn? How did they take advantage of the opportunities for them? Were there significant hardships in their life that they had to overcome that perhaps did impact curricular choices in a certain year or their grades along the way? You're giving another angle on what admission officers are probably seeing on the student side of the application, but you're giving it from a perspective that perhaps the student themselves is not aware of or is not capable of formulating. So that counselor letter is an emotional document. And I always warn parents, like, you will cry. You will cry writing your counselor letter. And I had one lady who I worked with this year who was like, I didn't believe you, but then I started it. And it's true. I'm like, yep, it is, because it is an emotional thing to graduate your child that you have guided for all these years.
Yeah.
And what we often see is in that first draft of the counselor letter that we review for families, very often there is a lot of emotion and a real desire to go back and pick up in babyhood and bring the reader through the journey. So what Michele and I always counsel people is like, do that, like write that letter, do it. And then either frame it or put it in your photo album, like save it because it's significant. And I don't want to downplay it,
right.
But then you got to turn around and actually write a counselor letter. And I know Michele has some great tips on, what an actual counselor letter is going to be like.
Go for it, Michele.
That's right. So again, when we tell students, when you're writing an essay, you're responding to a question or an essay or anything else, remember what the question is. What does the person who's asking want to know? It's important for the student and the parent to understand in the college application process what the application reader wants to know. Overall, they want to know, who is this student going to be on a college campus? Mm-hmm. If we accept them, will they come? Are they prepared? Will they thrive here? Will they stay from freshman to sophomore year? That's one of the things in the rankings. It's important. Will they graduate from us? Mm-hmm. Will they be a good member of the community while they're here? And, ideally, would they donate to us later on? But that's long term, right? They really want to know, what about these hopefully 4 years? Will the student come? Will they thrive? Who will they be here? So they're not just looking at the past, they're looking with that lens toward the future. And then the different readers, it depends on the college and their particular admissions office, but they're going to go in and they're going to read a bunch of applications, and then they're going to come together in a committee and say, all right, we love these 10,000 kids. We can only accept 1,000 of them. Right. So they get together and you have a stack and I have a stack, and we advocate for these kids, right? As admissions officers. You don't want them to say, oh, I love this kid, and somebody else say, well, why? And they go, you want them to have a clean story, that you want them to have some hook that they can share, right? You don't want them to say, well, I'm not sure they're ready. Or, this kid took public speaking for 4 terms, and somebody else goes, why? And they say, I don't know, right? It's not typical in high school. So you want to take any questions that reader is going to have when they read the student's application, the transcript, the course descriptions, and the profile, any questions that they may still have, and deal with them in that recommendation letter. Right? So something in a typical counselor in a school would be told is, if the kid in sophomore year got all C's and D's, but freshman, junior, senior, they were A's and B's, explain what happened that year, right? So sometimes there was a health crisis, and you give that context and you say why the kid is going to succeed now, because remember the goal. Who are they going to be on the college campus? Will they succeed? Will they stay? Will they graduate? Right? So trying to give that reader those key points that support your child's application. And this is a recommendation. They know it's from a parent, but it's still a recommendation. Sure. Students ask people who like them to give recommendations.
Right.
They don't need it to be, well, these are the problems, but these are the positives. No, this is a recommendation. And if there's been challenges this child has overcome, highlight it. If this kid has taken a lot of agency, a lot of responsibility, has great time management skills, share that, because you want to show your child is college ready, prepared and ready to succeed. One advantage homeschoolers have for a lot of us is that the child has taken increasing responsibility for their education and for their time management. A high school kid who has the requirements of being in school and their extracurriculars and getting the homework done for tomorrow hasn't had the experience of this class meets once or twice a week and you pick what you do in all those off hours. So highlight those strengths, show that your child is ready and will be a valued member of the community.
So I wonder if we could just take a minute to talk about the word recommendation. You guys, this is so wonderful that you're highlighting the counselor recommendation, because normally when a kid submits a college application, they ask their guidance counselor for recommendation. And that's what we're talking about here. But there are also, and I think the Common App does too, although I haven't looked at it recently to be totally honest, does ask for specific academic and character references as well. And some colleges that don't use the College App will also ask for something that's a specific academic recommendation from a teacher. So one of the things that I tell parents is that anytime your kid has a great experience in high school with an outside teacher, whether it's an online class or community college, as soon as that class is over, ask that teacher to write an academic recommendation, because that's going to speak more specifically to the kid's academic prowess. I did notice, and then just put that on file and hang on to it until college application time. When my kids were doing their college applications, I noticed that homeschool students were sometimes asked for additional academic references that students from public schools were not. So that's just something to be aware of, that might be part of the mix.
Well, and you can use quotes in your counselor recommendation letter. You can quote some of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So counselor letter, it is very appropriate for that to come from the homeschool parent.
Right.
But part of your academic planning as you are designing your homeschool is by junior year, it is a really smart idea to have some outside instructors, because those academic letters you're talking about, the teacher recommendations, those better come from outside people. And sometimes homeschoolers struggle with that. So sometimes it's like, well, I don't have a science teacher I can ask, but I was on the Science Olympiad team. Okay, let's go with that. Ask coach on the Science Olympiad team. Or I did English in the home, but I did go to this monthly book club. Let's get the book club leader in there. But that is one area where parents really do need to do some forward planning. And you need to think about who can be some, especially junior year, outside teachers who can serve that teacher recommendation function for my child. And then you're right. Colleges will sometimes allow for an other recommender, which could be, a coach, someone at a church, an employer, somebody who knows the student outside the classroom. Those are sometimes allowed as well. And it varies college to college, but Michele and I typically recommend having at least 2 academic recommenders from different core subjects. So a humanities sort of recommender and then a science and math sort of recommender, if you can get them. And sometimes families are confused.
And we'll be right back.
The Well-Trained Mind Academy, founded by Susan Wise Bauer, offers live online instruction and classical teaching methods that fit your students' educational plan. Our instructors are highly qualified in their fields and have years of experience in teaching, tutoring, and homeschooling. We work closely with students, parents, and instructors to create an educational environment that fits the needs of each family. From calculus to Japanese to essay writing to medieval history, the Well-Trained Mind Academy offers 150 courses for grades 5 through 12. Visit WTMacademy.com to learn more.
So you guys have done such a great job of talking about this 4 core, the transcript, the course descriptions, the homeschool profile, the recommendation. But I also feel like there's another aspect to the college application process that freaks a lot of people out, and that would be the personal essay. So there's a lot of pressure to make this like a Nobel Prize literature level thing that is on its own going to get this kid into college. So talk to us about the admissions essay.
It is a point of stress for a lot of people. And I understand this is something in the student's voice they need to be sharing about themselves and helping the admissions reader see them as a real person, but it's one part of the whole package that is being put together. So each part of the application serves a purpose. And whether you want to put more or less of any particular part of the student's personality in the essay, that's a choice that the student can make. It needs to be the student's voice. I will say that admissions officers we've spoken with have shared, it's a common question we'll ask, what is your favorite essay from last year? Or what's the most memorable essay from last year? And two that I spoke to recently, one said, a student who worked at Dunkin' Donuts. She talked about how she was a barista in the morning and how she had these different regulars and how she connected to people. And then the other one said their most memorable essay was about boarding an airplane and seeing people go by and wondering what destinations each one was going to, right? So these are snapshots. These are moments. It does not have to be publishable quality. It does not have to be the Nobel Prize or Pulitzer Prize winning kind of document, but it needs to be authentic. It needs to be what the student values and share a picture of them. It helps give a rounded picture of the student.
So genuine. It needs to be genuine.
Absolutely.
And
Holly?
sometimes I think this essay can feel weighty to families because the Common App has a lot of parts to it. And you're getting to this usually summer after junior year. Suddenly it seems like everything hinges on the Common App. I'd just like to remind families, 95% of what you've done to get into a college has already happened. The Common App is the documentation of this. So sometimes the essay looms large, and I would say this is a made-up statistic. This is a made-up Holly statistic. But probably 80% of the time, the essay does not make or break a candidate. It serves to confirm what they're seeing elsewhere in the application. Now, if you come across as a rude, arrogant jerk, that probably could do you some harm. But a good essay can maybe give you a little bit of a nudge, but really it's a coffee date. It's just a way to help an admission officer get to know you better. But I would like to pull it even a little broader because, again, families get focused on that one essay that goes to all the colleges. Then we're recording this in October, about this time of year, they get slapped in the face with a whole bunch of other essays because often a specific school will ask an additional supplemental essay. Sometimes the kids are so tired by the time they get to those essays that they treat them as throwaway. But I would just say if a school is bothering to ask an additional question, they probably really care about those answers. So, do your due diligence, put some time into researching the school, and don't forget about the activities list, which is also to some degree a writing activity.
That's right. When we're talking about the activity list, people get hung up on there's 10 spots. I have to have 10 things. No, you don't. Right. When I talk to admissions officers, this is an admissions officer made up statistic. They say between 4 and 5 is the average number of activities people put in. They give more spots, but you don't have to have them. Now, homeschoolers sometimes get wrapped up in, extracurriculars. That's like, being the cheerleader or the football, the quarterback. No, it doesn't. It could be, but if you pull down that list, there's family responsibilities, there's volunteer work, there are all kinds of things. Because what the college is asking is, how do you spend your time when you have a choice? Now, our homeschoolers have a choice much more than a typical schooler, depending on the organization that the family has chosen, their philosophy, right? But when it can be difficult sometimes to decide what's where, but remember that this is part of the picture. And in the little 50 characters for describing your position and the 150 characters for describing what you learned, you don't have to say just cut and dried, I was on a podcast. You can say, I participated in a discussion on a podcast so that we could share our philosophy and learn together. Or Right. So you can be more descriptive, but tight.
I know that when my kids were doing the Common App, they got to the sort of like the volunteer opportunities and they said, oh, I don't have anything to put here. And I said, okay, hold the phone. I mean, my husband was a minister for 35 years. I said, tell me all the things you do at church on Sundays. Take part on the music team, run Sunday school, babysit in the nursery, clean up afterwards. I said, all of those are volunteer jobs. So let's list all of them. And sometimes, you think of some good titles like, assistant nursery manager. You were the assistant nursery manager. That's what you did. So yeah, it's a matter of really thinking more globally about everything this kid is doing and then putting a name to it so an admissions officer can recognize that it was something that they put time and effort into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So we've done a lot on documentation, but we've got 3 more to-dos to talk about. So the next thing that you guys really put a lot of emphasis onto is making a short list of those good fit schools. So talk to us a little bit about what makes a good fit school. We've already thrown some shade on quote unquote Ivy League or selective schools as not necessarily being the best. That was our negative. So let's do a positive here. What's a good fit school?
Well, I would like to say that for some kids, an Ivy League school absolutely can be the best fit college. So I don't want to make it sound like we hate the Ivy Leagues. They're just really hard to get into. But for looking to try to find a good fit school, that's going to be such a personal thing. And, I'm sure Michele does this in her practice. I certainly do it in mine. So the first thing I do when I have a client is I take them through some self-exploration surveys. And there's some great ones out there that you, again, can find for free that really just help kids refine and think about, well, what do you actually want out of a college? And sometimes that's, I know exactly what field I want to study. Sometimes it's, I have some idea of a direction. Other times it's like, I don't know, and I need some choices. So maybe you need a larger place where you can choose from a large variety of majors. Some kids are super comfortable in an urban environment. They really want that setting. Others would prefer to be rural. So you can start with some of these big questions to whittle down an appropriate list of schools. So you can start with academics. You can start with geography. I know we're going to talk about finances. You certainly, I think, need to have finances in the front of that conversation. But also, I would say you just need to knock on a lot of doors as well. So it is a big thing to say to a student who probably doesn't have a ton of life experience yet, they're still young, where do you want to go to school? Right. So again, I'm all about lowering the stakes. So maybe when that kid is finished with their sophomore year or very early in their junior year, start in your own town. You may have a large regional or state flagship in your own town. You may have a small private liberal arts institution in your own town. I don't care if your kid's interested in it. It's easy. It's close. Just go take a tour and see what the vibe is. And I think that will help students begin to find what feels comfortable.
Yes. And sometimes a student will say, oh, I know what I want. I want a big research institution in downtown in the city. And they haven't realized what that means or what the other options are. So I love getting advice from students. So a student, when my kids were much younger, who had just gone through the college search process, I said, so for you, what was something meaningful? What advice would you want to make sure we pass on to others? And he said, saying I should visit something that didn't match my list. So instead of looking at that big downtown, urban school, going and visiting a small liberal arts college and seeing what the difference, because either that says, I was right, I want that big thing, or it opens their eyes to new possibilities that they hadn't considered and say, oh, I could be happy here or here. I'd be excited to get accepted to either one. And that can be reassuring to students. One thing I don't like is when a kid feels stuck, right? I don't want you to get into only one place or think you have to have that. Right. So I'm blunt with students. My goal is not for them to go to a college and transfer after their first year, but they're not stuck even after they get in and move in. Right. Sometimes they find out after that first year of college, that wasn't the perfect fit. Okay. Keep looking. It's okay. You are not, stuck for life with the first choice that you make. We do want to make a good choice, and the self-exploration is what helps us do that. And most times they don't. Sometimes, though, knowing you have a choice can help you realize, I am choosing this and I'm sticking with this.
And I want to put in a plug here for physically visiting a campus if you possibly can. And I know it isn't always possible, but I know that with my kids actually walking onto the college campus and I'm not a huge fan of those sort of college for the weekend programs because they're very artificial. They don't actually give the kid an idea of what it's like to just be a student. Just going and getting saying, sure, book a campus tour, but just take some time to walk around, sit, watch kids go back and forth, eat in the cafeteria. Eating in the cafeteria is a really, really good idea. All of those things. I know that when my youngest was looking at colleges, she applied, she did all of her applications first, and then everyone that admitted her, we tried to book campus tours. We did one campus tour and then the world shut down. And the rest of her campus tours were all virtual. And nope, that didn't give her any sense of what it was like to be there. So in the end, she ended up going to the one school that she had physically visited because she could actually picture herself there. So I just think that's super important if you can pull it off.
I recommend that students use those virtual tours in a specific way, though. Yes, it's hard for a lot of kids to get to many schools. Visiting one locally is great. Then look at the virtual tour. Compare what you see and their marketing tour, right? So if you do both, that can help the student say, oh, this is how they say what I saw here. And it's only one, but it still helps. Also, I'm sneaking in another follow the schools that you're interested in on Instagram, on
yes, absolutely.
any other social media things, so that they get the student view.
We should at this point repeat something that kids should know, but don't necessarily, is the colleges can also follow you. So, be wise about what you put on your Instagram and Facebook page.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yes. And as you're doing those visits, and particularly most families, I think, start broad. They've got maybe 20 or 30 colleges on their mind, and then they narrow to maybe, 10 or so that they're going to apply to. The data about those colleges can become overwhelming, and how to keep that information straight. So when Michele and I were writing this book together, we really wanted a publisher that was really all about access and equity in education. And that's why we went with College Unmazed as our publisher. And one thing they do that I think is fantastic is they have what's called a college data organizer on their website. It's downloadable. It is free. And what this thing does, it's a marvel to me because I am not tech savvy, but you can drop in up to 12 schools and it automatically pulls in the data that colleges report to the federal government. So the IPEDS data. So we know that it's good data. So on one spreadsheet, without you having to fill in anything, you have everything from the average SAT scores, you have the average cost of admission broken out by income category. You have freshman retention rate, you have admission rate. You've got all the hard data you need, and you can look at it side by side. So again, I've said it before, I'm such a fan of free tools, and this is one that I just think saves hours for families. I would suggest anybody go ahead and download, and College Unmazed isn't going to hound you. They don't come and then try to sell you stuff. They just let you download their chart and use it because that's a value to them.
I will link that in the show notes. Thanks for sharing that.
So with this, so we've talked a lot about sort of how to start evaluating. Of course, there are tons, and we've talked. So we won't belabor the point. We've talked about size, campus culture, location. I earlier I said how glad I was that during COVID that my daughter was in a school that was within driving distance. How long is it going to take the kid to get home? I will say, as having done this 4 times with college freshmen, that at some point they get really, really sick because they don't sleep or eat well or wash their hands. And so they get really sick. And, consider what you're going to do if your kid is really, really sick and you are 2 flights away from them. What are the dorms like? Are there houses that are sort of interest focused? We're going to talk in a minute about price tags. So, what are the scholarship and financial aid opportunities? All of these things matter. But correct me if you think I'm wrong, guys, but in the end, don't you sort of end up with a gut feeling of this is the one we're going to try first? Michelle's looking very skeptical about that assertion.
No, once the students are accepted and they're deciding between them, then they choose which one to go first, right? That yes. But I don't want them to decide as a junior that this is my ride or die, right?
Absolutely.
I don't want it to be this college or bust. So yes, getting a gut feeling is really important because really college is what you make it.
Right.
Any college you go to, there's lots of interesting people. There are professors. It may be easier or harder at some colleges to get to know the professors, but they're still professors, right? So it's the student's responsibility to be active and also to know it's tough at the beginning. Sometimes we say, oh, this is going to be the best years of your life. And they get there and it's like, I don't know anybody and I don't know where the bathroom is in this building. And I don't know where I pick up my tray. Do I go get the forks at the beginning or at the end of the line? There's a lot of new stuff and it's a transition and it's tough. So don't expect it's all, roses and bunny rabbits. Although good colleges sometimes during finals week will bring in bunny rabbits and lambs or the right time of year for stress relief. So getting to know the culture of the college, it is helpful.
Okay. All right. So so that was our second to do, make a short list of good fit schools. Do you guys have, specifics are really helpful. Do you have a number in mind that people should shoot towards for that short list? Short is a vague word.
Well, something I think families don't necessarily consider when they're dealing with the application process on the front end, because they're typically dealing most often with the Common App. They don't realize on the other side of that, they're going to get probably a school-specific portal for every college they've applied to. Just keeping up with those school-specific portals, which you really need to check a couple times a week, that can get to be a lot. So it depends. But when I see a kid who's edging much beyond a dozen schools, I'm going to ask some hard questions. It certainly can happen. So if there's a family with great financial need or a family that is extremely serious about chasing merit awards through a college or university, then sometimes they have to cast a wider net. If a student is going for a particular major, something like musical theater, where a college or university may only take 20 students total, they may need to cast a wider net. But often I find if the number creeps beyond 10 or 12, a lot of times that student hasn't quite done enough work refining what they're really looking for. And or they have, but the parent has some strong ideas, often schools with a lot of prestige attached to them, that they think, oh, just give it a shot. So that can balloon a list. And again, sometimes without that accompanying knowledge that, oh, when you just drop that school on the list, well, that's 4 supplemental essays and probably 10 hours of work for that kid who has a 2% chance of admission.
Not to mention the application fees.
That's right. The extra essays, the more rejective or, selective the college, the more kids they say no to, the more essays typically they ask. The more supplemental work a student has to do. So I recommend that it's not just the number, it's the order in which you apply. Going for something earlier on that's a rolling admission school, which means that they will give you a response based on when they get your application, as opposed to they wait until they get all the applications on January 1st and then they go through them in a random order and tell everybody at once, right? A rolling admission, if it gets it today, then maybe in 2 weeks you have an answer. So that can be helpful as well to kind of reduce stress. But leave some of those moonshot schools to the end. Maybe do one of those early. And then if student by then is like, I am burnt out, well, you don't make one of the moonshots. But don't leave the schools that you think, I think I would love this. There's maybe one essay. It's maybe a 20% or 60%, whatever it is, chance of acceptance. Don't leave those to last, especially if there's merit money involved. Merit money, you want to make sure you're at the right end of the order.
Which is a great transition to our next do, which is do consider price tags. Guys, it matters what you pay for this education. I'm 56 now. When I was in my late 40s and starting to pay for my own kids' college education, my husband and I still had friends our age who were still crippled by student debt, had been crippled by student debt for over 2 decades. It is not a small thing to go into debt for a college education. So talk to us about price tags.
And chances are, if they've been paying for 20 years, they've paid more than the college cost. The interest is killing them. They're only paying interest at this point, and it's just awful. So yes, sometimes in our culture, it's like the brand name. The more expensive it is, the better it is. not always true, right? Absolutely not always true. And that's kind of a romantic idea or a status idea, however we want to phrase it. Colleges also know that you value the price tag sometimes. And so there are colleges that will have costs almost as high as some of the Ivies, but there's a secret that they give merit aid to everybody. Sometimes it's not even secret. They put it right on their website. Everybody is going to get a $25,000 merit aid award. Well, so, really their college is $25,000 less than the actual list price. You need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to how much the student is expected to pay. And if they're having a job and working, I think that's awesome. When I worked all the way through college, but I was able to pay much more of my percentage because the cost of college was a lot less back then, right?
Yeah.
But I've seen parents say, oh my word, my daughter worked all summer and also went out to movies and did this and that. And at the end of the summer, she only has this much to contribute when I expected that much. Well, if you don't have a discussion up front with your child, then they don't know that. Talking with your child honestly about how much you can contribute, how much needs to be from other sources is really important. The money you have to pay for college is money you've earned in the past, money you're earning while the kid's in college, and money that's earned after the kid has graduated, right? So for a parent, hopefully there's some assets from prior and current. We don't want to mortgage a parent's future. They're retiring. That hurts the kid too. Yeah. Right. So loans for parents, I try to avoid those if at all possible. If you need $1,000 or $2,000 to make up the gap, that might be one thing. But we're talking people taking $30,000 a year, a kid loan. That adds up. So being careful about that and talking about what the expectations are. The student probably doesn't have a lot of money saved up from the past. They'll have some while they're earning, and then maybe some loans. And so that'll be their future earnings.
So one thing I think that's so puzzling for families is college pricing is so opaque. And it can be hard for families to understand what the bottom line is going to be. So again, super important to run that student aid index calculator so you kind of can figure out, am I going to be a needs financial aid family, or am I going to look at schools that offer more merit tuition? Merit aid. And fortunately, Big J Educational Consulting, again, I don't work for these people. I just love that they put out a free chart. They have a big free chart of hundreds of schools, and they tell you what percentage of financial need is met. And then they also tell you what the average merit award is and what percentage of students get that award. So awesome if the average merit award is $30,000, but not so awesome if only 3% of students receive that award. So I love that data chart. I think it is very helpful for families. And a lot of what I do, and I'm sure a lot of what Michele does as well, is we look at a list that a family's put together and we say, well, you say merit award is really important, but every school on this list only meets demonstrated financial need. They don't give a merit award. They only give need-based awards. So sometimes, we can right size a list there. Sometimes families will think that they can make up a gap with outside scholarship. And while we all read about those kids who do win just incredible amounts of outside scholarship, we know from research that the average award of a kid who wins is about $3,000.
Right.
So to think you're going to make up a $20,000 gap through outside scholarship is probably not realistic. So make sure your college list fits your financial needs as well. If you are going to apply for outside scholarship, also avoid the sites that really are just buying your data and are not actually giving you anything of value in return. So I like the Bureau of Labor Statistics CareerOneStop has a scholarship finder that you don't have to give up all your data for. I love that one. I love JVL scholarships, and I'm sure you guys will link these in the show notes. But those are two that are reputable, and I do recommend them for people. I just don't want people to think it's going to be a miracle cure, because it is not.
Because it's not.
And finally, you also have to look at the financial fitness of the school you may attend. So just like parents sometimes face an opaque situation trying to figure out price, that same murkiness exists around the financial health of a school. It can be hard to determine the financial health of a school. So particularly if you are not going somewhere where you know they have a super high endowment and people are just beating down the doors to get in, you probably do need to do some due diligence. Checking, Forbes has a college financial grade that they award. Hechinger also has a financial fitness. You can look up the 990 forms if you would like to see a college's detailed financial information. But do cast a glance. Do cast a glance at that. And, is this a college that's having a lot of faculty cuts, or are they adding new programs? Those sorts of things can tell you, is their enrollment going up or down? You can use readily available information to at least get a guess of how this college is doing.
I think one thing I'd like to add to all that wonderful advice from both Holly and Michele about the evaluating what you can actually afford to pay for is from more of a parent point of view, which is, I think it's really unfair to allow a student to apply to a dream school that you're not going to be able to pay for. So I'm going to put in a parent plug here for being mean on the front end and saying to a student, be realistic. Think to yourself, this is a great kid, but even if they get into Harvard, they're not going to get a massive scholarship. I can't pay for it. If they get in, they're going to want to take out a student loan. If I tell them then they can't go, they're going to resent it the rest of their lives. I mean, this is a time as a parent where it's actually good, I think, to run out the what could happen scenarios and embrace the worst case scenarios before you let the kid go to the effort of applying and possibly being accepted when okay, maybe 5% chance they're going to get a scholarship out of the blue, but overwhelmingly, the chances are you're not going to be able to afford this school. Don't even apply. Put your foot down, say no, be mean now in order to preserve the child's love for their college education as they move into this phase. And it's a very, very difficult choice as a parent to make, but I just want to encourage parents to be brave and to make it if necessary. You guys are nodding. That's good. People can't see, but you're nodding, so I'm not completely off base here.
No, you're on base, and every school is supposed to have a net price calculator available for families to use. So now they're not required to necessarily keep them updated, but they are required to have them. So you can usually get a ballpark figure for what you can expect to pay at a particular university. I encourage families to use that price calculator.
Yeah, and take it seriously.
Save it. Mm-hmm. Save it for every one of those colleges your kid's going to apply to either a screenshot or a PDF, because you'll have that documentation in case they don't give you, but do put in accurate numbers. Do not say, oh, I only make this much. Be accurate.
Yeah. Yep. Because you want to make sure that you are getting an accurate read.
Ma'am.
So, and so that brings us to the last do, which might be that you've gone through all these calculations and you've looked at all the schools and you either don't think you can afford it or the kid is not particularly excited about any of the options. Keep pushing forward for a 4-year college degree because this is the ultimate end of education can often be short-sighted and damaging. So I feel like we've all been fed this line that a 4-year college education is the be all and end all of the educational experience. And that's just not true. There are alternatives. So talk to us a bit about how we can consider some alternatives.
I've worked with kids who started their own businesses while they're in high school or started working as a programmer for somebody while they're in high school and didn't need to go on and get the degree. An apprenticeship, an internship sometimes leads to something that is really meaningful. There are all kinds of certifications or certificate programs that you can get. There are a lot of options. So it's depending on what the student's goal is, that they can do a different kind of education. I love that homeschooling allows us to help our kids learn a lot about doing projects, about critical thinking, et cetera. They don't have to wait until college to learn those things. So they don't have to necessarily go.
Yep. So there's apprenticeships, there's internships, there's vocational and trade schools. There's also the option of an associate degree at a community college, which may or may not be a step into a 4-year degree. It could be a step into a 4-year degree. but it doesn't have to be a step into a 4-year degree. It can be a step into a job. It can be a step into a certificate. It can be a step into something else.
Yeah, and sometimes kids just need a little more time, right? I'm sad when I see a kid who isn't very college ready and who isn't very college motivated, but who has a parent who is really college motivated for them. And sometimes that's a very expensive experiment to make, right? So you can send the right person, but if you send them at the wrong time, then it's the wrong thing. So sometimes just taking, maybe it's not college or no college, maybe it's not college yet. And that is not a less than option. That's a totally valid option. There are lots of companies that specialize in creating gap year programs for students who want to take a year or two before they go to college. And they sound wonderful. Like, quite honestly, I would love to do a gap year. I will be a 57-year-old gap year participant because it sounds awesome. But you don't have to have a fancy program. Like, if you can do some traveling, that's amazing. But if that's not in your family budget, anything the kid can do where they are probably working to gain exposure, even if it's not a fantastic job, a job, and creating some new experiences for themselves. Particularly, I know, there's a lot of homeschoolers that listen to this, but probably not entirely a homeschooled audience. And sometimes these kids are coming out of high school just with the demands of those rigorous course loads. They're coming out really burned out.
Yeah,
and
very
boy,
pressured.
if you give them a year or two to just unfold and relax and explore their own interests, they are so much more compelling as an applicant if and when they do decide to go to college. So, when people come to me during the high school process, like, we design a college prep experience for everybody because life is long and you never know what door is going to open in the future. So I feel like every high school student deserves an education that will leave a door open for college if and when they want to take it.
Right.
But not everybody is on a conveyor belt. And I wish our country, I think it's beginning to, but I wish
It's
our
starting
country
to get better,
had I wish there was more acceptance of the gap year because, boy, almost all our kids could benefit from it.
And Holly, I am such a proponent of a gap year. And I think that in large part, that's because of my experience of teaching freshmen for 20 years at the College of William and Mary. I used to say to my colleagues, and they all agreed with me, that when you walk into a classroom for that first day, you know which kids are 17 and which ones are 19 by the way they're sitting and ready to either take part or just waiting for it to be over. That extra year of maturity is such a massive, massive gain for a kid.
Absolutely. I did a gap year and truly enjoyed it. And I just want to second something that you said, Holly, about it doesn't have to be this fancy international experience. I worked at my family's business. I volunteered and taught a homeschool geography class. I worked on some projects that I've been really wanting to do, but I had been so focused on college admissions, to be honest, and SATs and APs that I had put that on the back burner, a story I was writing, a language I wanted to learn. I had such a wonderful year. And at the end of the year, my priorities and who I was as a person had changed so much that I ended up applying to all new colleges, getting accepted into a school that fit me way better than what I would have done had I just gone straight after high school. And just all of my priorities changed. I mean, one of the schools that I applied to my senior year of high school was, to be quite honest, although I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, because a boy I had a crush on was going to that school in another state. A year later, I was a little bit more mature and had, different priorities. And so my sister ended up doing one. We both had wonderful experiences and they weren't fancy. I worked for most of the year and saved my money to spend a few weeks doing my dream trip at the end of it. But it wasn't fancy, but it was something I will always treasure.
That meaningful experience is just, you can't buy that. That's just really wonderful. And I will say that there's increasing, I don't have statistics because they're not here yet, but I hear from more and more admissions offices and from more gap year people that we are seeing more students take that gap year in the last 4 years than previously. and more students needing that gap year due to the extra pressure and stress and learning loss that some people had during the pandemic. And it's a moment for us to think, why are we going to college right away? And for the kids to recognize,
I know. What's the point?
They're not all 17 in college freshman year.
Okay.
And that's okay. You want to be there because you're ready to be there and you're going to get something out of it. That's how you make something.
And just from a practical point of view, I'd like to point out that there's two ways to take a gap year. One is that you can go ahead and apply in your senior year as usual. And then when you are admitted, ask the college for a year's deferment. A lot of people don't know that you can do this. It's a very common request. Colleges almost always honor it. They just defer admission for a year. And then your gap year can be sort of, I'm just growing up a bit with, I already know where I'm going. But you can also just not apply in your senior year and take the gap year, apply the following year. And I will tell you from experience that this will not count against you. All you do is tell the college that you took a gap year to always say that you needed to work and earn some money. Everybody understands that. Nobody is going to, I think we have this sort of like this idea that it's going to disadvantage our kids if they've got a period of time where they weren't, chasing the academic goals with all their heart and soul and mind. And that's just not the case. Colleges respect a gap year. It will not disadvantage the student at all. And I know my oldest son, because I hadn't gone through this process before, I wanted him to apply, have guaranteed admission somewhere, and then take his gap year. And he just wasn't confident enough to do it. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He didn't know where he wanted to go. I had never done this before. So I sort of gritted my teeth and said, okay, sweetie, whatever you want. He applied the following year. Absolutely no problem. Not an issue at all. So you can let go of your fears on that front.
Well, I do think you're right about that. And I would just add that deferment policies vary a great deal college to college. So this will be, of course, just check the websites of the schools you're interested in.
And even if they say you have to request your deferment by May 15th, if you realize after graduation that, I'm really not ready. I had a family that I had assisted this last year. Mom contacted me after the fact, after they'd accepted, et cetera, and said, yeah, he really needs an extra year, but they said the deadline's this. What do I do? And I called admissions as a counselor and said, look, this is a situation. Is that a hard deadline? And they said, hey, we care more about the students than about the deadline. If he needs a break, then have him reach out to us. So that's the kind of college I want to go to. That was a college that changed lives college. That I want to go somewhere where they care more about the student than their numbers.
Yeah. So that's a great point, Michele, that if you call the college and they say, no, hard deadline, absolutely not, that would be a flag to me. Because what are they going to say when your kid gets walking pneumonia in their junior year and doesn't hit their midterm deadline? It's going to be the same response. So I actually like that as one of the ways to evaluate whether or not you actually want to apply to this place. Yeah. Listen, most people, and we'll sort of wrap up with this. I think it's important to recognize that most people who go into higher education don't go into it to be hard-nosed moneymakers. They go into it because they actually care about students. They care about education, and it fulfills them to see students find the right match of a school and flourish in it. So don't be scared to ask. Just ask and trust that your student is going to find a home among people who treasure learning.
Michele and Holly, thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you listening, Michele and Holly have a book that we've referenced throughout these last two episodes, and we have a code for you all to get 10% off if you want to check out their book for even more information on the college admissions process, but also just designing and documenting your homeschool as well. And that code is homeschool10. That's one word, all caps, homeschool, and then the number 10. And that's for 10% off of Holly and Michele's book. I'll have that in the show notes. I'll also have a link to their website where you can use it.
Holly and Michele, I'm so delighted that you were able to be here with us. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and I know our listeners are going to so appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
This has been awesome.
It's been a joy.
We've had a blast.
Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, Help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.